this is the next hand with Jack 10 suited, and we've already spoken about this kind of situation, and now it should be a lot more intuitive what we want to do. We said that 3-bet shoving range would look like Ace Jack suited and maybe pocket nines plus or something like that. And also, in terms of flat calling, we want to avoid flat calling most of the time. We're on the button here, which makes a bit of a difference. Now there's only 2 players left still to act. So that's bad for us, but it's not as bad as if we were calling from the cutoff or earlier. And the second thing is that the betting post flop is going to take place with us acting last. So small blind would be first if he's involved, then the big blind, then this guy, and then us last. And that's an advantage because we get to see what everybody else does first. We don't have to kind of guess before we see what they do. We can see what they do and then respond to it, which is basically a strategic advantage that we have with our position. It's called having position for anybody that doesn't know. So yeah, basically 3-bet range is mentioned, and we have a slight incentive for calling a few hands here. Even though I mentioned before we want to avoid it most of the time, this is maybe the exception to the rule, where there's a couple of advantages, being a bit later in position and having positional advantage. And the kinds of hands that we might want to call with are exactly hands like this. Suited broadways, essentially. This is the worst suited Broadway, but it's probably still good enough to do this. So I don't mind this play. If you want to fold it, though, I think that's also perfectly acceptable and has a lot of merit. But I wouldn't raise with it. The reason why I wouldn't raise is because he's now got the option of shoving over the top, and then we obviously have to fold. And he might do that with a lot of hands that we would do very well against. For example, all the pocket pairs from deuces through to nines we're going to be flipping against, not to mention the fact that we have positional advantage post-flop, and our hand plays really, really well post-flop. That's to say that if he has pocket deuces, I think we'll win with Jack 10 suited more than half the time, more than the actual equity that we have, because we can bluff with a flush draw, or he's not going to know if his pair of deuces is good if there's like high cards on the board, stuff like that. And the other thing to show you is this. If I give you Jack 10 suited, and I give him a hand like Ace Queen offsuit, what kind of equity do you think you have with Jack 10 suited against Ace Queen off? What do you reckon?
About 30%.
Okay, so once again you can be surprised when you see the answer.
40.
Yeah, so it's quite a lot more than what might seem intuitive. What it means is unless he's got Ace Jack, which dominates us, or Ace 10, etc., we're going to have pretty good equity still, even when he has the real hand. So with positional advantage post-flop, and with a hand that plays really nicely, we're going to win pretty often against Ace Queen if we just call and see a flop. Whereas if we 3-bet raise, he's often now going to just get all his chips in and shove, and then we obviously have to fold. So then we lose 60 chips without a fight. Whereas if we called, we could see a flop. Just to show everybody, because they might not be aware, if we actually give him hands that dominate us, we're in really bad shape. So I have shown the good case scenario, but if we take a worst case scenario where we actually are dominated, so we give him Ace Jack off and suited, you're in bad shape in these scenarios, pretty bad. But it's never as bad as you think. This is more like what you thought the Ace Queen would be. This is a 2-to-1 underdog because our hand's suited. If we're offsuit, it's going to be about 3% worse, so then it's going to be just under 30. It's going to be more like a 70-30 showdown. So, even less.
Yeah.
But that's the worst case scenario. It's never too bad. Well, that's actually not the worst case scenario. I'm obviously ignoring the fact. The worst case scenario would pretty much be when he has pocket jacks. That's pretty bad news. It's pretty miserable, yeah. And if he has aces, it's also miserable. Like so.